Behold and wonder at the humble boxcar. Truly a remarkable specimen of railroad heritage. Because let's be fair, when it comes to railroading, the boxcar is almost as old as railroads in general. It wasn't too much of a stretch for someone, probably multiple people, to be like, hey, so what if we, put, the stuff in a box? On wheels. Ta-da! There are a few different kinds, of course. In the modern day, we see a lot of high-cube boxcars, which are pretty much just really, really big boxcars, and refrigerated boxcars, too. But for the most part, boxcars have remained relatively unchanged over the last, 2 centuries. They are very much a case of, if it isn't broke, don't fix it, because it's just a box with a door on it. That's it. Yeah, within that medium, you can make all sorts of different kinds of doors and change the size and perhaps the material the box is made of, but all in all, they're just boxcars. And outside of perhaps flat cars, they are easily the most basic kind of railroad rolling stock, since you can put pretty much anything inside it and move it safely, because it's covered. Unless, of course, it needs refrigerated, in which case put in a refrigerated boxcar. But outside of that, the point is, boxcars are good for a lot of things, and we like boxcars around here. Eventually, though, someone had the genius idea to actually make billboards out of these boxcars by selling advertising space to various companies. The owners of said boxcars were often being leased by the railroads, advertised various different companies instead of just the railroad. And at face value, it seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It's a moving billboard. Why not allow it? Well, you don't see this pretty much at all anymore because it's been outlawed, quite literally. And you're probably wondering, what, why? What could possibly be the problem with that? To begin with, one must understand how railroading works in many cases. Some railroads do own their own cars, yes, but many times they lease the cars from the actual owners of them, and it is the owner's prerogative what was actually painted on the railroad cars. Railroads themselves usually didn't sell advertising space. It wasn't a part of their business practices, even though it probably would have made sense in retrospect, but they never really did it. The billboard cars almost always belonged to the leasing company, and it would be emblazoned with large graphics advertising the product. Now, since these cars are leased, the railroad has to pay a fee for their use. That is obvious. And generally, railroads prefer to try to have their own rolling stock to avoid that entirely, since, of course, that gets expensive. But it did happen pretty often, and still does. But during the 1920s, leasing companies started dabbling into the advertising market. They would pay a portion of the mileage charge they would get from the railroads back to the shippers as a rebate for requesting their specific cars. The lessors would then paint their cars with showy advertisements for the shipper's product. So basically, the leasing companies weren't necessarily charging the shippers directly for the advertising. No, that wasn't how it worked. They were actually paying them to request the leasing company's specific cars, which would mean those cars would get more use, and therefore they'd have to be paid more money from the railroads. And this benefited the shippers because they were getting paid to ship their product to a degree, and they would get free advertising. Good deal. But you know who's caught in the middle of this whole arrangement? The railroads. Excuse me. Excuse me. What the heck? It was costing them more money to ship things because they had to pay the leasing companies more money to use these specific cars. And if you might be saying, well, why didn't they just tell the shippers they had to use the railroad's cars? Yeah, they could do that, but then the shipper would just go to a different railroad that was more willing to give them what they wanted. You see the problem here? And what really didn't help was when these cars were being used for things outside of the product that was being advertised. Namely, if it was a competitor. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be a big deal if a boxcar advertising Budweiser showed up with Campbell's Soup or something. Those two companies aren't exactly competitors in the technical sense. But what if a car that was labeled Swift & Company showed up at an Armour meatpacking plant, for example? That's a bit more irritating. And the unions and the companies involved in that hated it and then got angry at the railroads about it when it really wasn't even their fault. And over time they started getting really sick of it. Eventually, the railroads would go straight to the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, who comes up a lot on this channel. And yes, they have a history of being annoying, but in this instance, they totally sided with the railroads. They took one look at it and were like, yeah, that's really annoying. And the railroads were like, yes, it is. So in 1934, the ICC banned the rebate scheme entirely. And later in 1937, they banned cars with billboard advertisement from interchange service. Cars could technically still bear the name and logos of the shipper leasing the car, but not specific products. Third-party advertisements were also banned. The Association of American Railroads also put in place Rule 84, which on their own books bans billboards on railroad cars. The point is, they couldn't be done anymore, because it was taking money away from the railroads who were moving the things in the first place. Honestly, this probably would have gone a lot better if the railroads themselves have thought to advertise on their boxcars. If they wanted to handle the logistics of that, that's one thing. But because it was the leasing companies do it, with this really sketchy scheme of paying the shippers to request specific cars, yeah, that's not gonna fly. So what's the future of this practice? Are we ever gonna see it again? Well, in the early 2000s, a couple guys named Patrick Moore and Fred Johnson founded a company called Freight Train Media LLC, with the brand new spanking idea that freight cars could be the next great advertising medium. Which, guys, that's not a new idea. This is the same feeling I get whenever I see an article showing off the amazing technical revolution of electric trains. Like, are you serious? Are you serious? Really? Okay. Or those other articles talking about how wind is the future of sea travel. Like, really? It's a new thing, is it? Interesting. But that's off topic. Either way, they plan to start up this business, but given nothing's been said about it to my knowledge since 2007, I don't think it went well. Probably because you have to convince the railroads to actually want this. The rule was put in place at their request. And I think the last thing any of them want is another third party coming in and being like, hey, we can put advertisements on your box. No, you're not doing that again. Because, yes, on paper, sure, the moving billboard concept makes sense. But when you factor in the logistics of actually doing it and making sure you don't put a rival's product inside a car, you can kind of see why railroads just don't want to put up with this. On their own, railroads will put certain things on their rolling stock, like it's been done, but that's the sort of decision they make on their own. I doubt you'd ever convince any of them to let a third party do that ever again, purely because of how out of control it was. These guys know they're not playing with it anymore. Really, the only place you can see this sort of thing is in the model train hobby. There are so many different kinds of boxcars with different companies' adverts on them that people can get for their layout. Many are even custom made. And in that way, it's one thing, because hobbyists really like the multicolored nature of these advertisements, especially the retro-styled ones, even if the company in question never actually advertised in this manner, therefore making the car fictional. It's just something interesting to look at on a layout, and it's certainly harmless in that way, but when it comes to doing it in the industry, I can't see it ever happening again, just based on everything I told you. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord R 444, A Purse 723, Royal Hunter 2060, Isaac for 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redline, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds The Baxter, Caleb Crossway, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Stalinsky, Jared Brussel, Joshua Long, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitson 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Terrevel, Liam Wright, Hayden DeGrow, Metal for Life Guy, Hannah Bird, No, Eric Hutton, Williard Conklin, Kurt Forkham, Ohio Trucker 1, Mitchell Cole, Mr. Sleepy, Dr. Razor 78, Nylon, AET Museum, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.